Hello everyone, I am Rodel Reyes Tawagon, and for today's lesson, we will discuss the most important timeline of our history, the Renaissance Classical Humanism, the Religious Reformation, and the Enlightenment. So at the end of this lesson, students or every one of us will be able to identify the major educational theorists during the Renaissance period, internalize the importance of understanding the Renaissance contribution to Western education, and apply these philosophical orientation to our modern practice of education. So to start this lesson, let us understand first what is Renaissance Classical Humanism. So it is a revived interest in the classical world and studies which is focused not only on religion but also on what it is to be a human. So reviving the humanistic aspect of the classics. In order for us to better understand the Renaissance period, we need to know first what happened during that era. So the Renaissance, a transitional period between the medieval and modern ages, began in the 14th and reached its zenith year in the 15th century. So during the Renaissance period, a lot of things, movement, and even Reformation that has happened. Even the knowledge and theories that are still practiced in our generation actually emerged and started during the Renaissance period. So it is the most important and salient era or part of our history where a lot of major educational theorists emerge and contribute and shaped, influenced our modern education system. So when we think of the Renaissance period, we sometimes associate it to Italy, which is true. So classical humanism in Italy is an artistic and literary center of the Renaissance. Humanists saw themselves as critiques and custodian of knowledge. When we say custodian of knowledge, these are individuals or groups who are responsible for preserving, protecting, and transmitting knowledge. They play a crucial role in ensuring that knowledge is not lost or forgotten and that it is accessible to everyone. So when we say custodian of knowledge, we can relate it to our modern society. We can consider teachers or educators as custodian of knowledge, professionals or those groups of people who receive diplomas. Those are the people that we can consider as a custodian of knowledge. There's a huge difference when we say knowledge and wisdom. Knowledge comes from learning, while wisdom comes from living. So every one of us, every people in our world can be considered as a custodian of wisdom, but not a custodian of knowledge. So these three right here are the great writers of their age who wrote their pieces in Italian language rather than Latin. These are Dante Alighieri, Francisco Petrarca, and Giovanni Boccaccio. The Renaissance humanist educators were literary figures, writers, poets and critiques, artists, teachers, critiques of society and taste. They brought wit and satire as well as erudition to their work. They sought to educate officially minded people who could challenge existing customs and expose and correct mediocrity in literature and life. So now let us proceed to the major educational theorists during the Renaissance period to CE 1600s. Starting off with the most popular one, Confucius, who believes to live from 551 to 478 BCE, a Chinese theorist. Confucius views education as it prepares people for their social-political roles by cultivating reverence for ancestors and traditions. Curriculum of ancient Chinese classics and Confucius analects, highly selective examinations are the examples. So because of Confucius, education and political power were not confined to a class of aristocrats who ruled through inheritance. That's why any boy or girl or any person who study hard could reach the highest rank of the government, meaning your success in life is based on your educational background. So now let us proceed to the second major educational theorist during the Renaissance period to CE 1600s, which is Socrates, from 469 to 399 BCE, a Greek theorist. Socrates believes that use of probing intellectual dialogue answers basic human concerns. Therefore, education should cultivate moral excellence. So, in Socratic dialogue as teaching method, Socrates believes that teacher should be a role model, meaning there should be a dialogue between the teachers and a student. For example, the teacher leads by posing thought-provoking questions, then students actively engage by asking questions in their own. So, the discussion goes back and forth, and from that, we can cultivate moral excellence in education. Next is Plato, from 427 to 346 BCE, also a Greek theorist. Plato believes that education is a reminiscence of latent ideas, music, gymnastics, geometry, astronomy, basic literary skills such as philosophy for ruling elite of future philosopher kings. So, Plato is more clear that schools are used for sorting students according to their intellectual abilities and interests, and education in his principle is tied to civic or political purposes. So that's why our modern education system nowadays has a lot more components and composites, and it sorts students according to their intellectual abilities and interests. That's why we do have a lot of courses to take on and etc. Okay, so the next is Hildegard of Bingen from 1098 to 1179 BCE, a German theorist. So during her time sparks the women empowerment, for which she believes that women should have a multidimensional education in religion, nature studies, and music. So she also believes that teacher as mentor and guide to individuals' spiritual, natural, and moral development. So as you observe, as the years go higher, many educational theorists begins to realize equality and being more open towards opportunities regardless of their gender. The next major educational theorist during the Renaissance period to CE 1600s is Aquinas, from 1225 to 1274 CE, an Italian medieval theologian. He set teacher as moral agent. Education related to universal theological goals, synthesis of the theological and philosophical, which is the basis of philosophy used in Roman Catholic schools. He believes that education should be based with human nature with appropriate studies for both spiritual and physical dimensions. The next is Erasmus, from 1456 to 1536 CE. He is a Dutch Renaissance humanist. He believes that human beings are capable of profound achievements, but also with great stupidity. Erasmus is more focused on Christian orientation, which means that educator or the teacher acts as the social and intellectual critique. So now let us expand our understanding to Erasmus, critique, and humanist. Erasmus had a gentle disposition when it came to the education of children. He recognized the importance of shaping a child's predisposition to education early in life. He advised parents and teachers to be worthy cultural and ethical models for their children. Erasmus believed that a teacher's worldview and academic preparation were highly important for successful teaching as a humanist educator. Teachers needed to have an ecumenical and global outlook that was not limited by narrow interest. As part of their pre-service preparation, teachers needed to be well educated in the liberal arts, especially in the classical Greek and Latin languages, and literature, and in history and religion. As a humanist, Erasmus was most concerned with teaching literature. Erasmus developed the following method for teaching literature. He suggested motivating students to read good books by having them explore an author's meaning in their own lives. He encouraged teachers to use conversation, games, and activities to illustrate the book's meaning. Ayan. So, methods for teaching literature by Erasmus. So, the first method is to present the author's biography. Second is to identify the type or genre of the work. Then discuss the plot. Reflect on the book's moral and philosophical implications, and then analyze the author's writing style. So that is the method for teaching literature according to Erasmus. Now, to further our understanding with the Renaissance classical humanism, we also need to know its contribution to the Western education. Okay, so the Renaissance humanists emphasized knowledge of Latin and Greek as hallmarks of the educated person. It is also important to note that Erasmus and other Renaissance educators were moving to a humanistic or human-centered conception of knowledge, rather than approaching their human subject through scientific inquiry. Humanist educators explored their concepts through literature. So, the invention of the printing press in the 1423 in Europe advanced the literacy and schooling dramatically. So before the printing press, students painstakingly created their own copy of a text by taking dictation from teachers. The university lecture was essentially experience in which students recorded their professor's word. But now, the invention of the printing press by mid-15th century, Europeans were experimenting movable metal type of printing. Johannes Gutenberg, a German jeweler, invented a durable metal alloy to form letters for the printing press. So it made information accessible to a larger reading population. The printing press inaugurated the information revolution, which means it was a momentous technological innovation whose impact still benefits the generation and the computer information dissemination generation. All right. So now we are done with our first topic. Now let us jump to the next timeline of our history, which is the religious Reformation and education. Now, to better understand the religious reformation, we need to first tackle the freedom from papal authority. So, papal means pope. Papal authority just simply means the power of pope. Someone who represents the pope is a papal representative. So, what really happens during the freedom from papal authority? So the Protestant religious reformation of the 16th and 17th century was stimulated by significant social, economic, and political changes in Europe. Humanist criticisms and scholastic authorities weakened the Catholic Church's central authority to enforce religious conformity. So they enforced religious conformity. So the emergence of centralized national states shifted people's loyalty to their own monarchs and away from the Pope. Okay? So these are the Protestant religious reformers who sought to free themselves and their followers from papal authority, and to interpret their own religious doctrines and practices. We have John Calvin, Martin Luther, Philip Melanchthon, and Ulrich Zwingli. These are the 5 Protestant religious reformers. While doing so, the Protestant reformers formulated their own educational theories, established their own schools, structured their own curricula, and reared their children in the Reformed creeds. Luther, Melanchthon, Calvin, and other Reformation leaders concerned themselves with questions of knowledge, education, and schooling because they wanted these powerful weapons to advance the Protestant cause. Protestants established vernacular schools to instruct children in their common spoken language, for example, German, Swedish, or English rather than Latin. These primary schools conducted their denominational control, offered a basic curriculum of reading, writing, arithmetic, and religion. So after the Protestants established vernacular schools, the Catholic began to establish schools and university that teach vernacular languages along with Latin. That's why nowadays there are still a lot of Catholic schools that still uphold the practice of Catholicism and Latin sacred prayer. Protestant nowadays are Christians or born-again Christians, which is different from Catholic schools. Both Protestants and Catholics used schools to indoctrinate children with correct religious beliefs and practices. Only members of the officially sanctioned church were hired as teachers, and teachers were carefully supervised to make sure that that what they teach is approved by the doctrines. Take note of the word indoctrinate. So this is a period where catechism and many catechists started. Their number one task is to teach children with correct religious beliefs and practices. In fact, teacher supervision and licensing developed during this period, which is the Reformation period. Now let us further discuss the catechism. In question and answer form, catechisms summarized the particular denomination's doctrines and practices. Although memorization had always been a feature of schooling, the catechistic method reinforced it. The belief was that if children memorized the catechism, they would internalize the doctrines of their church. So to ensure the doctrinal conformity, religious educators developed the catechistic method of instruction. That's why many Catholic schools wanted their students to memorize their sacred prayers or important events so that their students will internalize the doctrines of their church. For example, the example of the question and answer format of the Catholic or Catechism. For example, Calvin's Catechism of the Church of Geneva. So the catechist will say, or will ask, what is the chief end of human life? The student will answer directly, to know God by whom men were created. The catechist will ask again, when did the Battle of Lexington take place? The students will answer again, on the 19th of April, 1775, here was shed the first blood in the American Revolution. So this is the example of the question and answer format of Catholic Catechism, and where the question and answer, or in our modern education system, the oral recitation and education started. And now for Martin Luther, a Protestant reformer. So Martin Luther from 1483 to 1546 stand out as one of the most important religious reformers in shaping Western history and education. So Luther recognized education as a potent ally of religious reformation. He saw church, state, family, and school as crucial reform agencies, believing that the family had a key role in forming children's character and behavior. Luther encouraged family Bible reading and prayer. He also wanted parents to make sure that children had vocational training so they could support themselves as adults and become productive citizens. So Luther argued for compulsory education for all, or the universal education. His main reason is that education was necessary so that Christians could read and understand the scriptures for themselves. So the Reformation contributions to Western education. So earlier we have discussed the Renaissance contributions to Western education. Now we will discuss also the Reformation's contribution to Western education. So what will it be? So the Protestant Reformation reconfirmed many institutional developments from the Renaissance, especially the dual-track system of schools. While vernacular schools provided primary instruction to the lower socio-economic classes, the various classical humanist grammar schools prepared upper-class males for higher education. Though their stress on Bible reading, the Protestant reformers leaves their legacy to the future educator by focusing their teaching on literacy. So that is the religious reformation and education all about. So after the years of religious reformation, the Enlightenment's influence on education happened. So in the 18th century, religious influence over education was challenged by the naturalism and rationalism of the 18th century age of reason, which is the Enlightenment that spread throughout Europe and the America. So the Enlightenment period is a period where science and technology emerge. So they use the scientific method. They now use the scientific method of empirical observation to discover how nature and the universe worked. And education, they observed children, especially their stages of development, of how they play and act to construct a natural method of instruction. The educational reformers, Rousseau, Pestalozzi, and other progressive educators discussed that modern education were influenced by the Enlightenment view that children were naturally good and that teachers should base their instruction on children's interests and needs. And like the medieval medieval scholastics, the Renaissance humanists who based their ideas about education on the past, the Enlightenment philosophers, scientists, educators examine the present and look forward to the future. Rather than relying on tradition, Enlightenment educators emphasized using reason and the scientific method to improve the present situation and to create a better future. After the reconstruction of education, the separation of church and state happened. And that's the reason why schools nowadays are liberated and autonomous, because they are challenged and confronted with naturalism and rationalism of 18th century age of reason. So that ends our discussion about the Renaissance classical humanism, the religious Reformation, and the Enlightenment. I hope you learn and gain a lot of insights about our discussion today. Thank you so much, and God bless.